Today is the yahrzeit of a very big tzaddik who had the privilege, as did Tati, to have in our lives. And his name was Reb Nachum Zalman Gurevich, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha.
Mr. G's father.
So
Tisha Bav, the day he passed away.
Yeah, he passed away on Tisha Bav, and I think it was his daughter-in-law, Chava Gurevich, who said to me, I still remember where she said it to me, that Reb Nachum Zalman Gurevich, he was very famous for being very emotional and crying a lot. And he would say Tehillim and crying, and most of the time on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, he would be crying during the davening because he felt it so deeply. And
he was chazan for, I think, Shacharis or lots of Shacharis on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I've been crying a lot of the time, you couldn't even hear it, and then he would have a hand towel next to him at the Amid where it was chazan, and at the end of the davening would be wet, honestly.
Yeah, so he was just a very larger than life, gorgeous man. He loved Bubba and Zeta, my parents. He knew them very well, and it was a very deep mutual respect. And Reb Nachum Zalman Gurevich, he was one of the 5 families
who came. That's from the Frierdiker Rebbe in 1949.
Yeah, and he was very. He had a mischievous streak. He was a big Yerushalayim, and he was a no-nonsense man. And I still remember on the steps of the yeshiva, we spoke for a minute once, and he said to me that when anybody who has a number on his arm walks into the yeshiva, he is in awe of them. He is in awe and respects any Holocaust survivor who can still come and go into a shul after what they saw. So he was a man, and he also saw a lot of suffering and deprivation, and he had a lot of mesiras nefesh for Torah, for learning, but also he did a lot of things to save a lot of people in Russia,
Siberia.
Yeah, and he was a Hebraman. He was like a real character, and he helped a lot of people with what they call in Russian spekulacja. In other words, buying things and selling things and being on the black market and stuff like that. He was also in the Russian army. Anyway, so he was one of our beloved teachers in Al-Khana, and his daughter, Miriam Gopin, who I mentioned before, was in our class of 6, the founding year of Al-Khana. Anyway, I just have so many wonderful memories of Reb Nachum Zalman, and I'm going to tell a story about him. So I have here, this is the book that Mr. G wrote about him, and it mentions, so it says here, Reb Nachum Zalman Gurevich, a life as told by his son Shmuel to Ian Grimblatt, with contributions by Nachum's daughters, Ida, who is now Alea Shalom, Ella, Razel, and Miriam. And there was actually another daughter who passed away on Shavuos.
Which is why he used to say Kaddish on Shavuos.
Yeah. And okay, so I'm going to read this story, but I want to just tell you a couple of things about him first. And that is that he originally, when all the 5 couples, they all, when they came, they had to be in business. because they had to support their families. So he had a knitwear company, and didn't call it a company, a factory, and they all used to daven in the shul that my family went to, which was called the Shtibel, and
in Carlton.
In Carlton, and so I'll tell you something about Reb Nachum. So after he, all of them used to work during the day, and then at night they would go around trying to encourage people to send their kids to yeshiva. And yeshiva was just a little like a cheder school, and at night they would go around trying to raise money. And
Nachum was the main one.
No, all of them,
Zalman, yeah.
all of them. No, but also to lobby to get kids.
Yeah,
it was a big thing. It wasn't a school where you enroll your kid. This was like just starting from the ground.
So let me say something. So Reb Nachum was my teacher in year 12. It's the first time I learned Tanya. And so he would say that he would go around to Jewish families, mostly Holocaust survivors, and would say they're putting together a school, and people didn't really believe that it could happen. And he asked for money for the school, for yeshiva, and for
people didn't have money in those days.
Didn't have money. They just came from Europe, and asked to send the children to the school.
To trust them with their children.
Yeah, with the lives of the children. So majority of cases, he got knockbacks. People would say, hair's going to grow in the palm of my hand before you've got to school. And he said that many times, he told us, I remember very clearly in school, many times that after going around to families and asking for money, ask them to send children to the school, many times he would go to bed and he would be crying on his pillow, and the pillow would be wet from the abuse that he got from people.
Yeah. But he was...
and now look how big school is now. You should have been through it.
Yeah, and it says, Nachum Zalman and Basia Gurovich on the early learning.
On the go.
Yeah. Anyway, so like I said, he was very, very fond of my parents, and the respect between my parents and him and Basia was a really deep thing. And I know that, so Reb Nachum Zalman also was very instrumental in helping people financially. And really that the Herschel Klein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, built the Melbourne Jewish Charity Fund, helping Reb Nachum Zalman in his work of going around and helping people financially and however they could. And all the Chassidim did that. I mean, Chaim Serebransky, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he helped get so many people jobs, and the Avas Yisrael that these people had was tangible. I don't know. It was incredible. They did it, the Lev of a Nefesh, they did it with their every fiber of their being. And I know personally, because I had a part in it, that Reb Nachum Zalman, when he would give money to help people, to be able to have money to pay bills or pay rent or buy food or whatever, he very often tried to do it in a way that the person receiving the money actually didn't know that it was charity. And so I know that he was very sensitive to do it in a way that allowed the people who needed the money to maintain their dignity. And this is very, very high level. Anyway, today is Yerotzat. And the Chaim Gurovich said to me, Reb Nachum Zalman was the one always crying for Bnei Yisrael. And now, on Tisha Bav, the one day that all Yidden cry, Yidden are crying. Mm-hmm. And so it's fitting that is his Yerotzat.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm going to read this story So it's from the HasidicArchives.com by David Zaklikovsky. In June of 1941, Germany invaded Russia in a massive offense. Russian citizens, already war-weary, scrambled for survival amidst the chaos. Basha Gurevich, a young wife from Moscow, purchased numerous loaves of stale bread to keep her family afloat through the difficult months ahead.
So, and originally in the start of the war, Germany and Russia were allies. But then, soon afterwards, about a year after, so Germany attacked Russia, and the Russians didn't expect anything. And Molek Gurevich told me, I remember that in Moscow where they lived, that not only was there no food, there was even cannibalism. Like it talks about in Eicha, which we read last night, that people were eating people. There's literally no food at all when the Germans attacked Moscow. And that's where the Gureviches lived. And now you're going to hear what they did about the starvation.
So, yeah, it was very well documented that the level of starvation in Moscow, and probably other parts also, was such that there was cannibalism and, things like they killed cats and dogs.
Yeah, cats and dogs, yeah.
And ate them because otherwise they would die, which is sort of, I must say, I was saying to Zayda that Eicha is the most horrendous graphic description, and the level of suffering and tragedy that came about because we didn't love each other. It should scare the hell out of us to be really good people. Okay, so as the Germans advanced into the Soviet Union, Basha and her son, which is Mulek, fled to safety deeper in the mountains. Although supplies dwindled, the Gureviches had their backup bread to curb their hunger. Nochem Gurevich, Basha's husband, where's the picture? You want to hold it here?
Yeah.
You have to hold it there. They don't have to see me.
Yeah.
They can see the picture. And this is Basha and Nochem Zalman.
Yeah.
And my father took that photo.
Yeah, of course. It's great.
Yeah. My father took all the photos of the yeshiva and certainly was beloved to all the main families. Okay, so Nochem Gurevich, Basha's husband, was drafted into the Red Army.
That means a communist army.
Yeah, well, the army, and was stationed near Moscow, which the Germans bombed incessantly for months. Serving in the vicinity of a large city. Keep it up.
Yeah, keep it up.
Yeah,
okay.
keep it
up. Go.
Yeah, bring it closer.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. Serving in the vicinity of a large city made it easier for him to keep his kosher diet and to keep to Shabbos and Yom Tov. He also assisted many Jews who were in need. And I think that was part of the fiber of his personality. Avos Yisrael was something that permeated him.
He didn't think just of himself, like some people who are self-centered, like, oh, I'll save myself. But he wasn't like that.
So Nochem was admitted one day to a military hospital due to an ulcer, and Basha was duly informed by his commanding officer. Despite the perilous journey, Basha traveled to his bedside in Moscow multiple times in order to deliver kosher food to him. Following the war, the Gureviches illegally crossed the border into Poland with forged passports. They eventually made their way to Victoria, Australia, where they served as pioneers of the Jewish community and founders of the Yeshiva in 1964. their son Mulek and his wife Chava settled in Israel. The young couple wanted to purchase an apartment, but they needed the Jewish agency to guarantee their loan. Mulek made numerous, Mulek is Mr. G.
Mr. J.
Mulek made numerous trips to the Jewish agency office to obtain the loan, but the person in charge was never there. Mulek continued to visit the office regularly until a new clerk appeared one day. Jaded by the difficulty he'd encountered, in other words, worn out by all his difficulties till that point, he assumed that he would once again meet with excuses and no success. The new clerk was friendlier, and upon seeing Mulek's passport, asked him a slew of questions. It's a lot of questions. Where were you born? Russia? Your passport lists Poland as your place of birth. My family escaped the Soviet Union, Mulek answered, on forged passports. So this passport is forged? No, my previous passport was forged, but I used the same information in this passport. The clerk then related, I was in the Red Army during the World War II, and I was hospitalized next to a man with the same family name as you. His wife would bring him food every few days because he adhered to kosher laws. Mulek, aghast at the coincidence, replied, those were my parents. After a spitfire of questions to confirm the identity of Mulek's parents, the clerk, clearly moved, said, do you know what your father would do once your mother left? He would split the food with me so that I would also have kosher food to eat. He asked Mulek to wait a few minutes and returned with all the necessary signatures for the loan procurement. So I just want to wish Miriam Gopin, Razel Gorelik, Ella Wasowski, Mulek Gurovich, Arichas Yomim, and Lias and Neshama for Ida. And I'm just so grateful that I had Reb Nachum Zalman Gurovich, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, as such a special, treasured part of my life. He was lively, he was mischievous, he had a little impish, mischievous side, and it was Yerushalayim, and he was so real about Yiddishkeit. And I thank God that I was able to learn Torah with him in Al-Khana, and also to be, connected to the Gurovich family, through my friendship with Miriam. Then I would come there, and I remember one thing. I tried to organize a Shabbaton, and I had a really hard time, and I was actually reduced to tears. And I remember him saying to me, also in the foyer of the yeshiva, he said to me, it's only the people who do things who get hurt. The people who don't do things don't get hurt.
Yeah, criticism.
And criticism, yeah. And I was very vulnerable then, and it was very hard for me. Baruch Hashem, everything went ahead, but he really sort of gave me chizuk in a very real way. Okay.
So the takeaway from that story was that Nachum Zalman was lying in hospital, sick himself with a terrible ulcer. And then when his wife brought him food after she left, he shared the food with the next guy.
Another year.
The next year in the next bed to him. And so one could think, oh, it's got less to eat, there's starvation around anyway. But you know what? He not only got repaid, not only did it for a reward, certainly not, but not only got repaid himself, but what the idea of Mulek's story is in the next generation, that Mulek, Bashkacha Pratis, came upon that person who was a next bed to his father, who did him a special favor to give him the signatures for a loan that he needed. So, you know, when you do a favor for somebody else and you're not self-centered, it can not only, we don't do it for this reason, but it can happen. It can not only bring some reward back to yourself, but also even in the next generation.
And I must say that I learned this example from my parents. My parents very often would do things to help other people, which was to their detriment, that, you know, that they didn't have enough of something, but my parents, I'm very privileged, set a very high bar of helping other people. And my parents taught me in a real way, by example, that you should never be afraid to give and that you won't be diminished in giving. And really, that's one of the biggest messages. Don't be afraid to give. You know, very often when we give, we get a lot more than we gave. But just don't be afraid to give. If an opportunity comes along, do it magnificently, do it beautifully, do it with dignity. And that's the Avas Chinam that's going to bring Mashiach. And everybody has situations in their own life where that is relevant and they can do things. You don't have to be a teacher, and you don't have to be, you know, famous, and you don't have to be rich, and you don't have to be anything. Everybody can do chesed in their world.